Gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Cinema 4D Boot Camp. I'm Neil Barenblatt here at CreativeCow.net. Creative Cow with literally years and years of things to watch and forums to research. But today we're going to start Cinema 4D Boot Camp. These are introduction tutorials to people looking to get into Cinema 4D, but also to people who have used it quite a bit, who maybe missed a few things, or it's like a puzzle that needs to be put together. And so this first tutorial we're going to do is the interface tutorial. So this is going to be really introductory, going to show you around and try to make sense of this program, because don't kid yourself, it's overwhelming, all right? Especially if you're new to it. So what I want to do is help people to make sense out of this thing, so it can become more apparent of what it can do. So first, I want to start by showing you guys the toolbar. Okay, so we're going to go across this thing and across this thing, right? Meow. So first we have an undo, which I must have had a cube there before, an undo and a redo. So just like that, undo, redo. And everything here has short keys, so we'll just leave those out for now. Okay, so next thing we have is the select tool right here. So we have 4 modes of select. If you see an arrow at the bottom of a square right there, that means you can hold your mouse down and see what other options are offered to you. So we have regular select. These are going to be really similar to what's available in Photoshop. We have the square select. We have the lasso select. And we also have the polygonal select, where you draw points rather, to make a polygon, not to be confused with polygamous selection, because to my knowledge, that is illegal. So remember, polygonal selection, just like that. Alrighty then. Next we have the move tool. So for instance, if we were to make a cube right here, which I will eventually demonstrate how I just did that, even though you can probably just tell that I clicked, we can use the move tool to either grab on to the cube, just like that, or drag it by one of its axes, whatever. So the move tool is very simple and does as you would think it would do. The scale tool is also the same. You can just drag from the object or from its center or from any one of these axes, and you should be able to change the size of something according to its axis. Awesome. Rotation also does what you think it does. So rotates along any one of those axes. If you do it along the little silver one right there, you can just do a free rotate. And if you do it along the outer circle, it'll kind of just be in whatever axis you're looking at it in. So awesome. Okay, so I'm going to delete that and remake a cube just like that, because what I'm going to demonstrate next is the X, Y, and Z right here. So now, basically, to explain this, oh, well, I guess before that, you can see we have this one right here, which is an arrow. Basically, this is the recently used tools tool. So if I click and hold, I can see what I've used recently. The X, Y, and Z indicate what axes you are allowed to change things in. For example, right now I'm on the move tool and I have all of these selected. So if I just grab onto the cube and start moving, it's going to move in whatever axis that I want. But if I shut off X and Z and I just start moving it completely in circle, it's only moving it on the Y axis. And so you can basically, this is for restricting axes that you want to be able to make transformations on, scales, rotations, anything really. This little button right here is not too important right now as a beginner, but basically there's an object coordinate system and a world coordinate system. Everything here is made up of coordinates, as you can see what we'll get to a little later down the line here. But so this has its own set of coordinates, and then so does the world. So there's relative and there's absolute. But I wouldn't worry about that too much right now. Just know that it's there, and you can shut it off to object mode or world mode. So when the time comes, you know that that exists. This little button is quick render, just like that. If you click here just once, it will render out to your computer. And if you click and hold, you have a few options. You have the render region, which lets you select just a region of something to, let me get out of that, to render it. So if I do that again and just select a region, it's only going to render that region right there. I can also go to, that's the same as just clicking at render to picture viewer, and picture viewer is another word for your computer, but it brings up a separate viewer. Render view, that's the same as that right there. Interactive render region is kind of sweet. It's a little window you can keep open and resize. Get off of the polygonal tool there. And you can just always have it around, and maybe just on a little segment, and it will constantly update and constantly render what you do. So I can just drag this cube up there or change it in a way that I wish. And yeah, I mean, that is a preview render, just like that. And to turn it off, just go back and click it off again. And make preview actually will do a full little, I don't know, I never use that, so I wouldn't worry about it. If I don't use it, it's not important. I'm the end-all be-all of Cinema 4D. No, not at all. But I don't want to explain something I don't use very much, and I don't want to waste your time, wasting my time, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, the next button is your render settings. So here, which we will get into in another tutorial, this is where you set everything you need to, how you render out. So you have your general settings, which you probably want to keep that on full render. Output, you have all of your information right there. This is all in plain English. Save, that's all in relatively plain English. Multipass we'll get into, anti-aliasing we'll get into, options, blah, 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 effects, multipass, ignore it for now. It's coming, okay? Alright, so now we get into actually creating some things. So we can create a cube by clicking right there, or we can go undo. Or we can hold our mouse down and we have a number of things to choose from. And these are called primitives. Okay? So we have cube, sphere, cone, cylinder, blah, 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 blah. We can do any one of these things. We even have a full-figured man. Cool. Next, we can click and hold and see that we have a bunch of things called splines. Now, splines are invisible lines that you can make geometry out of, which we'll get into this in our modeling tutorial, but just know that if I make one, it is completely invisible if I render, but I could extrude it, and all of a sudden, there's something there. All in the modeling tutorial, so fear not, little ones. Okay, so we have quite a few options for that. We can do text, stars, blah, 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 blah. Inside, which is however many sides you want. Modeling tutorial, blah, 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 blah. Okay, here we have a bunch of model helpers. So, like, for instance, this smooths things, this creates geometry or creates thickness is what extrusion is. This lathes things, like takes a spline from here and wraps it until it could possibly look like a vase like that, or a vase, however you say it, depending on where you come from or where you're raised. This can literally sweep and create a tube if you wanted it to, and I never used that one, so forget about it. This right here this is the one I probably use the least out of, but it does have some really helpful tools that can solve a lot of modeling problems or get rid of a lot of redundancy. So for instance, symmetry can create mirror images of something, so you don't have to create two of everything. This is especially helpful when creating like a face or something. You only have to create half of it, and this basically just clones the other half and constantly updates it, so it's really nice. Here you can find all of your lights and cameras and scene elements like floor, which is basically an infinite plane, a sky, which is like an infinite environment, background, yada, 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 yada. Here are all the deformers. So we have, also in plain English, okay, so pretty cool. Bend, twist, bulge, shear, taper, bone, blah, 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 blah. Particle emitters and emitter physics. So this is just a simple particle emitter, and you can see we can add rotation, destructive, all of this stuff to it. And help right there, here. And here's your content browser. So if you open this, you'll be able to see all of your Cinema 4D presets just like so. Okay, and all of these tools can actually be found right here under the tools menu, shown as such. Now right here, this is also going to be gotten into a lot more during the modeling tutorial, but this is like select object mode, your anchor point, points, edges, faces, don't really use that, your texture modes, and to use the object tool. So those are just different ways of selecting things, so those don't really have much to do with the tools bar up here. So next, I want to briefly explain the viewer and what are your options with it, because there are a lot of options and a lot of different people like to work in a lot of different ways. So here's how I'm going to explain it. Right now, I'm looking through my perspective viewer, and to get around it, I'll make a cube just so we have something to look at. Something not too pretty, but also not too ugly. I can get around my viewer by these buttons right here. So this one is to pan, while this one is to zoom, and this one is to rotate. Now, there's a lot of short keys I'm going to be teaching, or I'm going to be using, because I'm much more comfortable with them, and so I'm going to go ahead and teach them to you because I think they're pretty important. So remember this: 1, 2, 3. Ready? Say it again. Say it again to yourself really loud. Say it 20 times really fast. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, that was only 3. 1, 2, 3. So now watch. I'm going to hold down 1 and move my mouse. Brilliance. I'm going to hold down 2 and move my mouse. Brilliance. I'm going to hold down 3. Okay? I'm going to hold down 3 and I'm going to move my mouse. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So this is a really fast way to move around a perspective view. Now, allow your mind to be blown. Oh my god, we have 4 views. This is extremely helpful. Do not kid yourself. So now, I can rotate, I can move in this view. I can also do the same thing in the top view. You obviously can't rotate around it, but I can zoom in. I can move around, and each one of these views are indicated by the word on the top left corner. So these are 2D views that really allow you to kind of see what you're doing. So now here it's kind of hard, especially if you have a bunch of objects, to see what's going on. And to go into any one of these, quote, full screen, you just hit the little maximize button on top of whatever window, and hitting it again will bring back up the 4 screens. Now, you also have the option to say, okay, if I go to Window and I go to Layout, rather it's not there. If I go to View, Panels, under any one of these windows, you can actually choose how many panels you want to view at one time and in what configuration you want to view them. So I want to view them 2 stacked, okay? Or I want to view them 2 side by side. Or, you get it. So that's pretty awesome. It's really a preference thing. I've never worked like this, but I don't see why I shouldn't, you know? I'm kind of a 4-window guy, just like this. And you can actually also, I'll go through these because you can change a lot of things about each one individually. For instance, let's see, let's go through them. Edit. What's important here? Configure is important here, but we'll come back. Cameras, nah. There's other ways to do this that are better, not so important. Editor camera, just make sure you're not in your camera so you don't accidentally move your camera. But there's a better way to do that. Display. You can choose the level of detail you want to use, because sometimes you just have so much in a scene, you don't want to show everything. You can also choose what form of shading you see in your viewer. So right now it's on Garage, which is pretty much more or less textured, but I can also change it to hidden line, which I like to do a lot. Or if you really need to see something, lines, baby. Give me some X-ray. Give me some X-ray. Awesome. But I'll keep it on Garage. And filter, you can actually choose what you want to see in each window. So to make sense of that, I don't want to see my red, green, blue axis handles anymore. So I'll just click axis, and now I don't see them. So that's kind of awesome. And you have all of these options. So I also don't want to see my grid. Nope, gone, no more. Extremely customizable. Can we say customizable? Extremely customizable. So I think we got all of that down. So that's the more or less the viewer windows. All right, so the next thing we want to look at is the timeline, okay? So if we go to window, timeline, this is very important. This is where we will be doing our animation. So we will be setting keyframes here. We also have the ability to look at our curve viewer, which is extremely similar to the After Effects curve viewer. I believe it's called the F curve in Cinema 4D. Oh, I can even take a snapshot. But in After Effects, I believe it's, I don't know, bell curve or something. But same exact thing. So, for instance, I will make a short animation, which I will also make in the animation tutorial. So, do not pay too much attention right now. Let's make one, shall we? Key right there. And key right there. So now we can play it back. Awesome. But if I go to my timeline, I can see right here by clicking on the cube all of my curve information. And if I go back to the keys, I can just see my keyframe information. So that is the timeline. The object manager right here is a lot like the After Effects timeline where you stack your layers. It isn't hierarchical in the same sense that whatever's on top is over something because we're working in 3D space, but it does work with parent-child relationships, with well, let me just show you. So right now we have a cube. I can also make a sphere, and I'm going to drag it off to the side, and I'll make a cone and drag it off to the side, and I'll make an oil tank and drag it off to the side, and I will make a pyramid and drag it off to the side. So now we rotate, and we can see we have these 5 shapes. Well, we can also see we have 5 objects in here. If you're used to the After Effects thing, this is really, it should make a lot of sense. So we can just see that, I mean, they're there. We can, you know, for no reason at all, just move them in place. The parent-child relationship comes in when, to make something a child, you just take it and check it out. Okay, so I'm going to make the cube a child of the oil tank. But I'm given 2 options, an arrow pointing to the left and an arrow pointing down. I want the arrow pointing down. If I do it pointing to the left, it's just going to put it under it. Like, basically it's saying ignore parent-child relationship. So I'm going to do the arrow down, and now when I move the oil tank, the cube moves with it. So I can also put the pyramid as a child of the cone. So now when I move the cone, the pyramid will also move. But if I just move the pyramid, nothing else moves. See that? I can also rotate the cone, and the pyramid will also rotate. So that's pretty cool. Also, in your Objects Manager, you have quite a few options. I can turn, basically, all of these circles mean something. Let's start there. Okay, so check it out. If this circle, if the top circle is red for an object, it will be invisible in the editor, but it will still be visible in the renderer. Okay, so we're messing with the oil tank right now. If the bottom one is red, which you have to click it twice to get to, it is invisible in the renderer. But I can also choose to have it visible in the editor and invisible in the renderer. I can do any combination of those. I can do both. I can do none. And a good shortcut is if you Alt double click, it will make both of them red automatically if you just don't want to see it at all. Likewise, you can also just uncheck, just like that. And this, we will get into in a minute, is adding to new layers. So cool. Also, with the Objects Manager, you have a few options like to merge objects, load object preset from your library, edit, undo, copy, paste, you know, basic stuff. And you also have something called tags. So these are going to be more specific to whatever tutorial, like if there's an animation specific tag or a modeling specific tag, I'll go over there. We don't need to know all of these. These are basically helpers, design helpers. They just do different things. They're functions, basically. So when there's a need for me to explain that function, I will get there. But for instance, if I were to click one, it would just attach itself to the object just like that. And that's pretty much the Object Manager. The Attributes Manager is how you modify any object that you have in the Objects Manager. For instance, if I click on the sphere, in my Attributes Manager, I can see everything about that sphere. I can see basic, I can see what it's named. So I can name it up there or down here, make it say blah 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 blah, and it automatically changes up there. It will tell me what layer it's in, visible in editor, visible in renderer, blah blah blah. And cool. I also can see what my coordinates are, so if I need to match something, I can do that. I also have every object has its own specific attributes, no matter what the object is, whether it's a deformer, a light, all of their attributes go down here. I can make a light right now, and you can see it has tons of its own attributes, but I will undo that and go back to just like that. So I can make the radius of the sphere bigger. I can give it more detail. I can make it a tetrahedron subdivision going on. I can not render it perfect, so when I render, if you take the segments back down, it looks pretty perfect right there. But now you can see, you know, whatever. Actually, I think what that does is even if I take them down, so now it does not render perfect. But yeah, so if you ever render perfect on, no matter what your subdivisions are, it will render a perfect sphere. So, you know, whatever. But like I said, every one of them has their different attributes. Like the cube's attributes look nothing like the sphere's. Instead, you can fillet it, that's how it's pronounced, and give it some beveled edges. So very, very object specific, the Attributes Manager. It's very, very snobby that way. But yeah, so there you have the Attributes Manager. And one thing before I go on about the viewer that I said I was going to get into and that I didn't is the Configure button. So let's click it. And we have many, many options. But that's the thing, I'm not going to explain most of these because they are pretty much in plain English. So this is really a matter of, this is another preference pane. So you just kind of choose what your preference is. But it has things like title safe in it and action safe. So if you're looking for things like that, this is where you go. You know, adjust your heads-up display, adjust what is displayed here. So really, that's just something to explore. All right, so let's go over the layers real quick. Layers are pretty simple in Cinema, and I think you'll really like them. I think you'll get the hang of them. So there's a few ways to add a new layer. Like I said before, you can click on that circle and just go to add to new layer. But I'm going to do it from scratch down here. So I'm going to right click, or rather, yeah, I can do that, or just go to File, New Layer, and it's automatically going to create a color for me. I can click on that color or double click and choose any color I want, but I'll just keep its automatic. And I'll just name this My Layer 1. Cool. So now what I can do is I can either click on the circle and say Add to Layer and choose, or I can just drag the pyramid into My Layer 1, and it will automatically bring that color to the object. So I'm going to do that with a few of them, and then I'm going to make a new layer, orange, and I'm going to say My Layer Dose. Change it up a little bit. Why be boring? And okay, so now the other way. I'll click on the circle, say Add to Layer, My Layer Dose. Add to Layer, My Layer Dose. And even I can do Add to New Layer straight from and rename it to blue. just like that. Okay, so now let me show you the point, the purpose, the reason for choosing layers, because it's very helpful. Of that I will not lie. Okay, so what you can do is use all of these to your advantage. And actually the last four I don't really know what they do, so I'm going to leave them alone. But for instance, if I want to solo a layer, just hit solo. Okay, with any one of them. Awesome. Word. Just like After Effects. These are kind of like these circles right here. So this takes it away from the viewport, and this takes it away from the render. So you can do any combination of those you want. This one is really helpful. This one takes it away from your objects viewer. So if you have like thousands of objects in there, or you're not gonna have thousands, if you have hundreds, or you might not even have hundreds, if you have 10, okay, you have 10 objects, enough to where you, okay, so let's say you need to see your attributes for some reason, and you have so many objects up here. Well, just make some of them invisible up there, and now you only deal with what you want to deal with. I mean, it's as simple, all right? Cool. You can also lock things just like that, and even graze it out, so you just can't do anything to that object. So, very useful. Awesome. And that's pretty much how layers work. It doesn't get more complicated than that. That is the layer browser. Second to last thing, we are going to look at the settings and a few of these things right here. So let's just go through these real quick. File, basic stuff. Edit, basic stuff. Objects, we went over. Tools, we went over. Actually, objects, we didn't go over most of them, but a lot of these are real specific to what we're going to be doing. But like, these are the things that were all laid out right here. So, okay, we did go over them. Selection, these are different selection tools. Structure, these are like the creative modeling tools, whereas functions are sort of the techie modeling tools, and we'll get into those absolutely. Animation, buttons, which are also all the ones you need are right here. So, this is kind of redundant. Character, may not really get into because I just don't know that much about it, but there are maybe one or two things we can take from here. But someone else would be much more inclined to do a better tutorial on that. Dynamics, we're not going to get into this too much because there's a better system of dynamics that's a little easier to work with called MoGraph, MoDynamics inside of Cinema 4D, and there's MoGraph right there. So we will actually absolutely have a whole tutorial dedicated to MoGraph. Hair, good for making hair and grass and things like that. Render, that's where this is identical almost to this thing right here. Plugins is where all your plugins are stored. Window, we have quite a few things that maybe we'll get into as we go here. And your help. There is one thing though in the window that we're going to look at, and that's how to change your layout. So right now I am at the startup layout, but I can also go to one that's meant for modeling, designed by Maxon to be better, more equipped for modeling. Likewise, they have one for engineering, one for broadcast, one for animation, yada yada yada. You can even make your own layout. So check it out. I'm going to go back to the startup layout, which is one that I actually did customize for myself, just like that, because the standard one looks like that. So let's go to that. And the great thing about Cinema 4D is that it's so customizable. So if I take any one of these boxes with a bunch of squares right there, all windows have them. See, even the little strips have them. So I'm going to click it and say undock. So here's my option, objects. So I can drag this anywhere, but I can also make it a tab and put it anywhere on the screen that I want. So let's make this tabbable. So I click this and say make tab, and then I drag this one onto that tab, and voila, I have my objects right there. Likewise, I'm going to undock it and then drag it back to where it was. And then drag that over, just like that. So now I have it back to where I was. But you can do that with anything. Like I could take the objects and click on that so it undocks itself. That's how that happens. And I I can just click this again and see how it highlights the side black right there like that. Now that's permanently etched until I move it again on that side. So easy access. Totally awesome. In my startup layout, actually, I have quite a few things ready for easy access. I have MoGraph right here. I have tabbed my coordinates, materials, espresso, timeline, and objects. And well, actually, you know what? I should have my layer browser. I like to have it tabbed right here. So let's just do that and say, hey, save as startup layout. Yo. Awesome. And these should not show up in my startup layout. So, yeah, that's very nice to have. Materials is where your textures go. Espresso, we will absolutely get into. It's like a node-based functionality. But yeah, that is the layout and how to change and customize your own layout. Lastly, we want to look at preferences because this is very important. So let's do it. Edit prefs. We have, well, you know, I'm glad we're looking at it, but I'm not going to go way into it because this is all in plain English. These are things you figure out as you go. But for example, units. You're going to start in meters, but I just figured recently that why not work in pixels? I do graphic stuff and like commercial and graphic design stuff. I work in 1920 by 1080 constantly. Do it in pixels. Cut away the confusion of meters. Just do everything by pixels. Awesome. So you can change all of those to whatever you're inclined to be working in. Likewise, I can make my scheme dark or light. Things like that, you know. I'm telling it I'm using a graphic tablet, which I am right now. Yada yada. I have my reverse orbit on because that's natural to me. Otherwise, when I reversed here, it would be backwards, which some people like. I do not. My preferences are stored here. And the other side to this is my project settings that I want to look at, which show up over here. So this is where you change your frames per second, minimum time, maximum time, although this can also be changed much more dynamically over here by the timeline. I actually showed you the more advanced timeline earlier. This is the simpler timeline where you can just scroll across your animation and zoom into the animation by dragging one of the arrows, zooming out, moving, and also setting your maximum time right here to 150, for example. And then I can scroll across my 150 frames or just bring that out. So I can see all of my 150 frames. And I can play right here. I can play backwards, frame by frame, beginning, end. Keyframe is actually right there. And we'll get into that in the animation tutorial. But yeah, so that is Cinema 4D interface. I hope it makes a little more sense now. I hope I dissected it well enough and gave you guys enough pointers to get started in a very intelligent way, which is my purpose. And stay tuned. I'm Neil Barenblatt with Cinema 4D Bootcamp. I'm talking to you through CreativeCow.net, who has been awesome and you know, is putting all this stuff out there. So stay tuned for more. Cinema 4D Bootcamp is available. So watch it and learn it now.